Over the next couple short videos, we're going to review passing data in SwiftUI, right? State, binding, add observable object, all of that stuff. And this review part, I think, is very, very important. Like, it's part of the learning process, right? You don't just hear about it once and now you know it, right? You've heard me talk about it. You've heard me explain it. We've had a chance to play with it and actually use it by building the past 4 apps. And now let's review it to like really hammer it home. Because remember, like I said at the beginning, my whole goal for this course was for you to leave it having at least a foundational understanding of how state works, binding, understanding the SwiftUI mindset, how there's one source of truth, you change that source of truth and then your UI updates, right? Just understanding that, like if you're leaving this course understanding that, it was well worth it. Because yeah, we may not have covered like all the animations, every single modifier, every single UI element. All that stuff is easy compared to passing the data. Like the biggest hurdle in learning SwiftUI is learning the data part. So hopefully after this review where we really hammer it home, that'll be successful. All right, so let's start off with @state. And to do that, we're gonna go all the way back to our weather app. Because for the most part, we've refactored our state variables into our view model. Now they're published on an observable object. We'll review that later. But back in our weather app, we're using good old plain state. Now again, remember, all the views in SwiftUI are structs, right? Like content view, that's a struct. And structs are value types, so they don't hold state. And remember in SwiftUI, our structs are constantly like destroyed and recreated as we're re-rendering these views. Well, the whole point of state is so that we actually can hold the state of this Boolean, this isNight Boolean, right? Because if we weren't holding the state, every time we destroyed content view and rebuilt it, well, it would get initialized as false and we would lose like the state of our UI. So by marking this as a state property, SwiftUI manages this data separately for us. That way we can destroy and recreate content view all we want. We still have the value of state, stored elsewhere. And also when this property changes, because it's marked @state, that is going to trigger a view re-rendering. Let's actually go to the documentation to see how they state it, because maybe that'll help you understand it when you hear it a different way. So here we are in the documentation, right? State, a property wrapper type that can read and write a value managed by SwiftUI, right? We're not managing it, like SwiftUI is doing that for us. And here we go. SwiftUI manages the storage of any property you declare as a state. When the state value changes, the view invalidates its appearance. It says, hey, I'm no longer valid, recompute, right? And it recomputes the body. So that's what I'm talking about when it triggers a UI update. Another way to think of it is how the documentation says it, right? It invalidates its appearance and recomputes, right? I'm no longer valid, redraw me. Use the state as a single source of truth for a given view. So back in Xcode, let's see that in action, right? We have our isNight variable is false. And if you remember, when we tap our change day button, we're flipping isNight to true. So let's run this on our preview. And that's what's happening. When I tap this button, I'm changing isNight to true. Our view invalidates, as the documentation says. It says, I'm invalid, redraw me. It redraws, except now isNight is true. It's no longer false because we flip that. And then, our background view changes based on that. And then our icon changes based on that. So that is state in a nutshell. And again, it's because our structs are constantly being destroyed. So we need to store these properties elsewhere. And SwiftUI manages that for us. And changing that data updates our view. All right, now let's move on to binding. And for that, we're going to go back to our barcode scanner app. But first, let's check out the documentation on binding. Okay, in here it says a property wrapper type that can read and write a value owned by a source of truth. So it isn't the source of truth itself. It can just read and write a value owned by a different source of truth, right? And it says that more here in the overview. Use a binding to create a two-way connection between a property that stores data and a view that displays and changes the data. Again, they kind of say this in multiple ways here, right? A binding connects a property to a source of truth stored elsewhere. That's the key, right? The source of truth, for example, in our view model, right? The source of truth is stored in our view model. The binding just connects a property to that source of truth, right? It binds them together, or you can think of it as creating a reference to it. And let's go back to Xcode to actually see that in action. So if you remember on our barcode scanner view in our view model, let's go to the view model here, we have our scanned code. And we'll review observable object later, but just know, the source of truth, the data is stored, right? Scan code is stored on our class, our view model, right? That's where it's stored. So our binding basically creates a connection to this value. And that's what we're doing in our barcode scanner view. If you look, when we create our just regular scanner view, we pass in a binding to scanned code. So back over to scanner view, right? This is where we're using our UI, view controller representable. Here is the binding to scanned code. And then, when our barcode scans it, we get that data, we change this value, right? But it is referencing, it is connecting to the value that was in our view model, scan code, right? This is the source of truth. Our scanner view, this binding, this is not the source of truth itself. It is a connection to the source of truth. So you can think of a way, if we go back to our barcode scanner view, right, the kind of the home screen, you can think of a binding as a way to, pass the source of truth down to multiple child views if necessary, right? It's a way to communicate between views. Again, you're just binding to the original source of truth, which is in our barcode scanner view model. Okay, let's move on to coordinators. And by the way, I am going kind of fast because this is review. I've explained this multiple times. We've played with it. However, if you're still confused, you're still not quite sure, please ask questions in the comments or hit me up in the Slack channel. Please, like I said, I really want you to leave this course understanding this aspect of things. So if you're not quite sure, I'm not going to let you leave until you're sure. So get a hold of me. All right. So on to coordinators. If you remember, let's go to our scanner view, right? This is the UI view controller representable. The coordinators help communicate between UIKit and SwiftUI. And if you remember my diagram, UIKit gets some information. In our case, it is getting the barcode that we scanned. Through delegates that we set up, our scanner view controller that is doing the scanning is passing the barcode to our coordinator. And now back to our code right here, you can see our coordinator set up. Our coordinator is created with a scanner view that again is this scanner view that has the scan code binding on it. So in our delegate methods, right, we had did find or did surface error. Let's just talk about the success case, right? So in did find, this is our UI view controller or UIKit communicating with our coordinator, right? So our coordinator gets the barcode and it's like, thank you, view controller. Thank you for that barcode. Now I'm going to tell my scanner view what that barcode is. So now the coordinator communicates with our scanner view, which is a SwiftUI view that has a binding to scan code. It says, thank you, view controller, for that barcode. Hey, scanner view, here's the barcode the view controller gave me. And then now the SwiftUI scanner view can tell its binding, its source of truth, which again was the view model on the home screen, what that new barcode is, and then the UI can update accordingly. So again, just to narrow in on coordinators, think of it as the middleman in between UIKit and SwiftUI. UIKit communicates with the coordinator communicates with SwiftUI. And if you're still unsure how to set all this up with the final class coordinator, again, go back and rewatch that section of the course. There's no shame in going back and rewatching certain sections or rebuilding certain apps. Again, repetition is the key. You don't just watch a video once and then you know it. No shame in going back and repeating things. All right, so that wraps up this review video covering state, binding, and coordinators. Again, if you have questions, leave them in the comments or hit me up in Slack. Let's move on to the other stuff.